Troops are deployed to help in the rescue mission after devastating floods hit Spain, killing at least 158 people. The authorities say many more are still missing.
I'm live in Valencia, where the clear-up operation is underway, but there's growing anger from the locals about how long it took the authorities to warn them that the floods were coming.
And these pictures we're unfortunately becoming rather familiar with now.
Indeed. Let's just spend a quick bit of time on what's happening in Spain. Just the explanations behind why we saw so much rainfall. A D.A.N.A phenomenon, that's the acronym, also known as gota fria locally. It's where you get an area of very cold air up in the atmosphere when low pressure has developed in the lower end. This is where we've got the winds circulating around, bringing in moisture-laden and warmer air from Africa and across an unusually warm Mediterranean at the moment. It's almost like you stick the hob up to full. The bubbles of air then go up much, much quicker into this colder air, intensely unstable air, massive storm clouds. The quicker and the bigger they rise, the torrential those rainstorms will be. And that's why we saw, just to remind you, over a year's worth of rain in 8 hours, a big bulk in 1 hour, and that is why things happened so quickly there. Now, these events have happened in the past. They happen about 10 to 20 times a year in the Western Mediterranean, but there are scientific studies showing that climate change is making these more regular, particularly during the autumn months, and more intense. Things are improving weather-wise a little bit during the last 24 hours, though, just around the Tarragona area. There's been some heavy rainfall and indeed down towards the west of Seville, where red warnings are in force at the moment. But some of the worst conditions in the last 24 hours have been between Barcelona and Valencia, 208 millimetres, several months' worth of rainfall here. And there is more rain to come, indeed, as we go through the next few days. Areas of greatest concern, again, where we've just seen that rain from the last 24 hours, close to Tarragona, and also across parts of the Balearics, Mallorca and Menorca. Could see some torrential and severe thunderstorms before things turn a little bit quieter later this weekend. Back to you both.
The number of dead keeps rising after the flash floods in Spain. At least 205 people are now known to have died. Dozens and dozens are still missing. Firefighters search for them in the wreckage of cars wedged together by the force of the water in a road tunnel. Now it's the community pouring in. An army of volunteers, thousands of them, armed with brooms, head to the worst affected neighbourhoods to help with the clean-up operation. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The number of people now known to have died in the flash floods in Spain has risen again. At least 205 lost their lives on Tuesday, but the authorities say dozens of people are still missing. It is already Spain's worst flood-related disaster in modern history and the deadliest to hit Europe since the 1970s. Thousands of volunteers have joined the military and emergency services to help with the rescue and clean-up operation. More heavy rain is expected in the next few days. Well, Mark Lowen is in Valencia for us tonight. Mark.
Sophie, the scale of this disaster is increasing by the day, with the number of dead rising rapidly, and many are still missing. Rescuers are picking their way through cars in the hope of finding more bodies. They set up a temporary mortuary in a city convention centre, and all around the city of Valencia, it is a scene of utter devastation. With tragedy comes an army of solidarity. Communities stunned by what's becoming Spain's worst natural disaster in its modern history. How do you even begin to clean up when the calamity keeps deepening? Every day the dead are rising by the dozen, and for volunteers it's overwhelming.
People that are not here have gone through a terrible agony until the time that, they passed away. And anger, because it's outrageous that, our local government didn't do anything about it, knowing they well knew that, this was coming, and did nothing about it.
When the floods came, they swept up and tossed around what lay in their path. Cars, homes, lives upended. A year's worth of rainfall in 8 hours. Juan Perez inspects what's left of his home, just one of those the floods tore through.
All my life, my memories, my parents lived there, and now overnight, it's all gone in 5 minutes.
The fear now is that many more bodies will be found underground as rescuers begin to reach inaccessible areas and flush out the water. The horrors slowly retrieved those trapped in car parks and garages as the floodwaters rose around them. In Aldaya, on the outskirts of Valencia, firefighters are stretched to their limit, locals pitching in a desperate attempt to clear what they can. Well, this was just one of the rivers that burst its banks, with the torrents of water and mud engulfing everything in its wake. And this is a scene that is repeated right across this region. What's also repeated is the growing sense of abandonment, the feeling that we're hearing from many people here, that in the absence of the authorities, they're having to depend on one another. We found a shop owned by Amparo Andres. She's had it for 40 years. It was lost in an instant. The water rose and came up to my neck, she says. I had the feeling my life was ending. At least I'm alive, but I've lost everything. My business, my home. And the government isn't doing anything. Only the young people around are helping us. Amidst the sadness, anger is rising here too, at local authorities that only sounded the alarm when the flooding had already started. Messages sent to phones of people who had no chance to escape. There will be big questions to answer here, but first the clean-up, the mourning, the start of coming to terms with catastrophe.
Well, many of the people who died were in the suburb of Paiporta, just 5 miles from the centre of Valencia. And you can see from this satellite image how badly the area was hit. This image was taken 2 weeks ago. And this is what those streets, fields and roads looked like yesterday, now completely covered in a thick layer of mud. The bridge in the middle of that image has been completely destroyed by those floods. People living there complained that they had no warning of what was coming their way. This was a street in Paiporta at 17 minutes past 7 on Tuesday evening. By 7:33, traffic is building up in the street. And just 5 minutes later, as cars are backing up, the water is visible there in the distance. And now look what happens just 2 minutes later. At 7:40, the whole street is underwater. Cars are stuck in a traffic jam. People have no idea what is happening or what they should do. And then, 10 minutes later, we've frozen this image so you can see there the force of the water as the cars start being swept off the road. It wasn't until 8 p.m. that residents got that first emergency alert on their phones telling them not to leave home. But by then, those streets were already deluged. Well, let's go back to Mark Lowen, who is in Valencia. And Mark, you can sense there the real anger that there wasn't a warning, there wasn't enough warning about what was coming their way.
Absolutely, Sophie. You know, last Friday, Spain's State Weather Service was already forecasting the storms that would happen on Tuesday. By Tuesday morning, they had issued their maximum red alert. But it is the regional authorities' job to interpret the weather warnings and to alert people by phone message. That only came at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, by which time buildings were already inundated. On Tuesday lunchtime, the regional president was giving a press conference saying that the intensity of the storm was due to decrease by Tuesday night. He insists that every correct protocol was followed. I mean, Sophie, this was clearly an extreme weather event that scientists say was probably exacerbated by climate change. And yet there will be big questions going forward as to why Valencia and why Spain was so ill prepared.
To Spain now, where the trauma and shock following Tuesday's devastating floods has seen an extraordinary display of community spirits. As the country mourns the deaths of more than 200 people, locals have joined forces to help the clear up and offer neighbourly support. Using mops, shovels and buckets, thousands cleared mud and debris from homes, businesses and the streets. As our Europe editor, James Mates, reports from Valencia.
An army on the march, citizens armed with brooms, mops, buckets, coming in their thousands to help the other half of this city get their lives back. It's a bank holiday here, the start of a long weekend, but all have abandoned plans so they can make the long walk into the mud and destruction.
You know people there?
Yes.
And how are they?
They are sad, they are without light, gas, water, nothing in their houses.
We have cancelled our plans, and yeah, we are here to support these people. That actually I think is a really nice idea.
We are the ones that are moving to help to clean, but the government is not doing much, I think.
The numbers here are extraordinary. We've been watching the steady flow of people come across this bridge for half an hour or more now, with no sign of it ending. It is driven, of course, by sympathy and concern for those so badly affected, but also by a widely held perception that the government and the local authorities have simply not done enough. They spread out into streets still awash with mud and debris. So many volunteers, you wonder if there'll be work enough for all of them, until you see satellite pictures that show just how far the torrents of water rip through this city. A massive brown stain spreading from the mountains down to the sea. Firefighters are still finding dozens of bodies, many under buildings. Tragically, people, believing they had time, went to get their cars from underground garages to save them from the water. Time was the one thing they did not have. On the streets this morning, it was the volunteer army doing the bulk of the work. Heavy equipment is being brought in, not least to begin removing the thousands of cars still blocking access. Regular army units and heavy construction crews are reported to be working, but there's scant evidence of them, to the disappointment of those now getting their hands dirty. Very dirty.
We need help. There is a lot of people in difficult situations. We need help. Valencia is my city and I want to help the people in the city.
This is a big job.
I know. I'm sweating a lot.
On a shop window, written by hand in mud, a simple message to those who've come to their aid. The single word, gracias. Thank you. James Mace, ITV News, Valencia.
Well, autumn flooding in Spain is not unusual, but it was the sheer amount of rain in such a short space of time which overloaded flood defences and left people with little protection from the violence of nature. Our science correspondent, Martin Stew, is here to explain what happened and why. Martin.
Well, look, weather is driven by differences in temperature, and the greater the difference, the greater the chance you're going to see some extreme weather. So what we're seeing in Spain at the moment is called D.A.N.A, a phenomenon where cold air from the North Atlantic meets warm, humid air from the Mediterranean. That forces the hot air to rise quickly and form these huge rain clouds, which can then get stuck, dumping enormous amounts of rain on the land below. Now, this happens often in the autumn, but in recent years, it appears to be becoming more extreme. And to understand why, we need to look at the geography of the Mediterranean. Now, because the Strait of Gibraltar is so narrow, not much water mixes with the Atlantic, so you need to think of the Med almost more like a giant lake than a sea. And over the past 40 years, as climate change has made Europe the world's fastest warming continent, the Med, as we can see on this graph here, has warmed twice as fast as the world's oceans. In fact, in August, we saw its hottest ever surface temperature recorded at 28.47 degrees. In fact, even today, surface temperatures in red are still above a degree above average. And with no way to cool other than through evaporation, what's happening is the air is holding more moisture, more water vapour. And in the words of one meteorologist, the result is the Met is starting to act like a petrol can, that water vapour feeding these rainstorms and causing that devastating flooding.
OK, Martin, thank you.